The airport smelled of burnt coffee, bleach, and too many people in too little space. My legs ached from the graveyard shift at the diner, my back still sore from scrubbing motel bathrooms before sunrise. 2 jobs weren't enough to cover rent, not with the bills stacking up, but I clung to the hope of one more chance, the cleaning company in Las Vegas that promised steady hours, maybe even enough to breathe again. If they hired me, I wouldn't have to choose between electricity and groceries anymore. That was why I dragged myself here, half awake, half dead, clinging to the frayed straps of my backpack as if my whole life were stitched inside. By the time I stumbled through security and found my gate, the world blurred around the edges. Announcements echoed, children cried, businessmen checked their watches, and I felt like a ghost moving among them. No one noticed the poor girl with tangled hair, jeans too worn at the knees, and sneakers that had seen better days. I boarded with the crowd, my ticket crumpled in my hand, and found my seat near the back of coach, narrow, cramped, with a stubborn armrest that jabbed into my ribs. I dropped into it with a sigh that sounded too much like defeat. My backpack became my pillow, my shield. I hugged it tight, shutting my eyes against the fluorescent glare of the cabin lights. If I could just close them for a second, maybe I'd forget the weight of the world pressing down. The scent reached me before I dared to look. Not the sharp tang of recycled airplane air or the perfume of the woman across the aisle, but something deeper, expensive, like cedarwood threaded with smoke. I opened my eyes just enough to glance sideways. The man in the next seat didn't belong here. His suit was cut too perfectly, the fabric too fine for coach. A watch gleamed at his wrist, sleek and subtle, but even from a glance, I knew it was worth more than I could see in a lifetime. His face was composed, sharp angles softened only by the faintest shadow of stubble. He looked like power-made flesh, and men like him never noticed girls like me. I told myself not to stare, not to wonder who he was, or why he was here instead of behind the curtain in first class. But curiosity pulled at me like gravity. Then, as if feeling the weight of my gaze, he turned. His eyes, dark, assessing, steady, locked on mine. My stomach twisted, panic flaring. There was nothing casual in the way he looked at me. It was sharp, deliberate, like he knew something I didn't. I dropped my eyes to the scratched plastic of the tray table, pretending to study my reflection in its dull surface. The plane began to taxi, lights dimming, engines humming in a rhythm that lulled the cabin into uneasy silence. My body begged for sleep, though fear tried to hold me upright. I shifted in my seat, fighting the heaviness of my eyelids, the ache in my bones. The engines roared louder, the vibration steady as a heartbeat, and exhaustion pulled me under. When my head tipped sideways, I expected the hard bite of the armrest. Instead, warmth caught me. Solid. Alive. My cheek pressed against the man's shoulder. I froze in half-conscious horror, ready to jerk upright, to stammer out an apology. But then his arm shifted, subtle and deliberate, not to push me away but to steady me, as if he allowed me there, as if I belonged. Heat surged to my cheeks, my pulse hammered, a frantic reminder that I was crossing an invisible line. Yet the warmth, the shelter, seeped into me like medicine, and my body betrayed me. My lashes fluttered closed, and I promised myself it was only for a moment. One moment of comfort I had never been given. I didn't see the man 2 rows back lift a camera, the lens glinting as it captured my sleeping face against the stranger's shoulder. I didn't see a quiet exchange of an envelope into the man's hand, a nod, a silent agreement. The evidence of a story being written around me while I drifted, defenseless. All I knew was the rhythm of the engines, the faint thrum of his heartbeat beneath my cheek, and the illusion that, just for a moment, I was safe. The city lights of Las Vegas glittered below like scattered jewels as the plane descended, but I barely noticed. My dreams had been heavy and strange, full of shadows I couldn't name, and when the wheels touched the ground, it felt like waking from one life and stumbling into another. The man beside me hadn't spoken a single word throughout the flight. Even now, as passengers stood to collect their bags, he remained still, his dark gaze fixed on the window as if he was calculating something far beyond my understanding. I told myself to ignore him. I told myself he was just a stranger. But something about the way he carried himself made the air between us hum with silent warning. I slipped off the plane as quickly as I could, clutching my backpack like armor. My body ached from exhaustion and nerves. I was here for a job interview, nothing more. A chance to clean hotel rooms for a few extra dollars. I had no family waiting, no one to meet me at the gate. Just the same empty stretch of nothing I'd known all my life. Yet as I walked through the terminal, I felt eyes on me. Not the casual glance of strangers, but something sharper, deliberate, like invisible threads tightening around me with every step. Outside the terminal, the desert night was cool and sharp against my skin. Neon signs pulsed in the distance, promising fortunes I'd never touch. I scanned the line of taxis and ride shares, debating which I could afford, when a man in a black suit approached. He was polite, smiling even, and held a sign with my name printed across it. Alice Bandi. My heart skipped. I hadn't booked a car. I hadn't told anyone where I was staying. The man gave a practiced bow and gestured toward a sleek black sedan idling by the curb. "Miss Ban, your transport is ready." "There's been a mistake," I said quickly. "I didn't arrange this." "Mr. Dantis insisted," he replied smoothly, as if the name should mean something to me. "He's waiting to ensure you arrive safely." The stranger from the plane. The one with the eyes that had looked through me. My pulse jumped. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to walk away. But something colder, curiosity, perhaps, made my feet move. The car door opened before I could change my mind, and the world outside sealed itself behind tinted glass. The city blurred as we drove, neon bleeding into darkness. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but the driver only smiled and said, "All will be explained soon." My stomach twisted with unease. Where was I going? Who was this man? And why did it feel like I was already trapped? We pulled up to a building that was too grand to be a hotel and too discreet to be a casino. Marble steps stretched toward towering doors carved with old-world symbols I didn't recognize. The driver ushered me inside, and the silence that swallowed me there felt heavier than any noise. He was waiting, standing near a window that overlooked the glittering city, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the picture of calm authority. When he turned, those same dark eyes met mine, and the room seemed smaller. "Alice," he said, my name rolling off his tongue like it belonged to him. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd trust me enough to come." "I don't know who you are," I whispered, my voice trembling despite myself. He stepped closer, each movement measured, predatory. "But I know who you are." The words struck harder than I expected. Something in his tone was too certain, too intimate. He stopped just close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from his body, his presence swallowing the air around me. "You fell asleep on my shoulder," he said softly, almost amused. "That was the beginning of this story, but it's far from the end." I took a step back, fear coiling low in my stomach. "What do you want from me?" He smiled faintly, a smile that held no kindness. "Everything." Before I could speak again, a man entered the room and handed him a small envelope. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Instead, he watched me as if studying a piece of a puzzle sliding perfectly into place. "Tonight is a turning point, Alice," he murmured. "One you won't see coming." Something in his gaze told me that whatever this was, it had been planned long before I boarded that plane. And as the heavy doors closed behind me, sealing me inside that opulent cage, I understood one terrifying truth. I wasn't a passenger in this story anymore. I was the target, and the game had only just begun. The first thing I felt was the weight of velvet against my skin and the faint scent of smoke and leather in the air. My eyes fluttered open to a ceiling I didn't recognize, high and ornate, with a chandelier dripping crystals like captured stars. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. This wasn't the motel room I had booked for the interview. This wasn't anywhere I had ever been. The sheets beneath me were silk, smooth and cold, and the bed was too big, too perfect, too expensive. Panic slammed into me as I bolted upright, my head spun, my pulse roaring. The last thing I remembered was stepping into that strange building, the man from the plane watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. Everything after that was a blur, a haze of exhaustion and confusion. I stumbled out of bed, my bare feet sinking into plush carpet, and that was when I saw it. A white dress hung on a stand near the mirror, lace delicate as cobwebs. Beside it, on a table, a folder sat waiting, my name scrawled across the front in bold letters. Hands shaking, I reached for it and flipped it open. Photographs spilled out across the table. My breath caught. It was me. Me in that white dress. Me standing at an altar beside the man from the plough. Me with a veil hiding my face as if I had agreed to all of it. I dropped the photos as if they burned. The room spun. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick, a nightmare. The door opened before I could gather my thoughts. He stepped inside like he owned not just the room, but the air itself. The same sharp suit, the same glint of power in his eyes, the same controlled presence that made the ground feel unsteady beneath me. He looked at me as if he had been waiting for this moment. "You're awake," he said, voice smooth and dark as velvet. "I was beginning to think I'd have to wake you myself." My voice was raw when I found it. "What is this? These photos? This isn't real." "It's very real," he replied, crossing the room slowly. "Every photograph, every signature, every witness." "I didn't sign anything," I snapped, backing away. "I never agreed to this." He tilted his head slightly, watching me like a predator studying prey. "At the airport, you signed a small document. You thought it was a travel form. In truth, it was the first page of our marriage agreement. The rest was handled by my people." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My hands shook so badly I could barely breathe. "That's fraud. That's illegal. You can't just decide we're married." "In your world, perhaps," he murmured. "But in mine, perception is everything. And the perception now is that you are my wife." "No," I whispered, backing toward the window. "I'll go to the police. I'll tell them what you did." "And tell them what?" he asked quietly. "That you fell asleep on a plane and woke up married? That you regret signing your own name? Who do you think they'll believe? You, a broke girl with nothing? Or me?" The truth of it crashed down on me with brutal clarity. He wasn't bluffing. In his world, his word was law. My denial would mean nothing. My protests would vanish into smoke. Ours burned my eyes, hot and helpless. He stepped closer, his presence swallowing the space between us. His hand rose, fingers brushing my chin until I was forced to meet his gaze. "The sooner you accept it, the easier it will be," he said softly. "I will never belong to you," I hissed, jerking my face away. His lips curved, not into a smile, but something darker. "We'll see." In that moment, I understood the depth of the trap I had walked into. It wasn't just a marriage I never agreed to. It was a cage, invisible but unbreakable, forged from lies, power, and the terrifying certainty that no one would ever believe me. And worst of all, deep beneath the panic and fury, a part of me feared he was right. The world outside the jet window looked like a painting, endless blue sky bleeding into rolling clouds. But inside my chest, there was only chaos. I hadn't spoken to him since the moment he told me we were married. I had screamed, cursed, demanded answers, but nothing changed. His word was final. The documents were filed. The witnesses were paid. And now I was on his private plane, flying to a country I had never set foot in. Italy, his home, my prison. He sat across from me, legs crossed, reading a document as if we were just two business travelers on a casual flight. Every detail of him was composed and deliberate, from the way he held his glass of whiskey to the way his eyes never lifted from the page. It was infuriating, how calm he was, how certain. I wanted to throw something, to scream until he understood that my life wasn't a toy he could rearrange, but screaming hadn't worked before, and I doubted it would now. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice breaking the heavy silence. He didn't look up. "Because I have to." "That's not an answer," I spat. "You tricked me. You stole my name, my choices, my freedom." Now his eyes rose, slow and deliberate, and the force of his gaze pinned me to my seat. "I saved you." "From what?" I demanded. "From a life I actually chose? From the little bit of control I had left? From people who would tear you apart if they knew who you really are," he said, voice calm but edged with steel. "You think I'm the villain, Alice, but I'm the only thing standing between you and a world that would devour you whole." I wanted to argue, but there was a weight behind his words that made my throat tighten. He was hiding something big. But every time I pushed, he shut down, his face hardening into that impenetrable mask again. Hours later, when the plane descended over Naples, I pressed my forehead to the window and stared at the landscape below. The coastline shimmered like a dream, but it didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like the walls of a cage closing around me. A fleet of black cars waited on the tarmac. Men in suits stood like statues, their eyes cold, their movements precise. No one spoke as they opened the car door for me, guiding me inside with the kind of deference that wasn't respect, but obedience. I wasn't a person to them. I was property. The estate appeared like something out of a nightmare and a fairy tale all at once. Iron gates taller than I'd ever seen swung open to reveal gardens manicured to perfection, marble fountains carved into the shapes of angels, a mansion that looked like a palace rising above the horizon. It was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful, and completely inescapable. "This is your home now," he said as the car stopped. "A gilded cage is still a cage," I whispered. His lips twitched, the faintest ghost of a smile. "Better gilded than buried." I wanted to hate him more than I already did, but the truth in his words gnawed at me. Whoever he was, whatever power he had, it wasn't empty boasting. There were people out there worse than him, people he was convinced would kill me. But why? Inside, the mansion was worse than I imagined. It was all polished stone, glittering chandeliers, and silent servants who bowed their heads as we passed. Every room felt colder than the last, and everywhere I looked I saw signs of control. Even the bedroom he led me to was tailored to me. Dresses hung in the closet in my size, shoes lined the shelves, jewelry sparkled beneath soft lights. There were perfumes on the vanity that smelled faintly of vanilla, the scent of the cheap shampoo I always used. It hit me then. He had been watching me, studying me, planning this long before I ever boarded that plane. When he left the room, I collapsed onto the bed, trembling. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me anymore. It looked like someone else's life, someone else's story. I walked to the balcony, gripping the iron railing so hard it hurt. Beyond the gates, the world was vast and free. Here, I was trapped behind beauty and power and lies. But as the wind brushed against my skin, a single thought anchored itself in my chest. I would not be broken. He could surround me with silk and gold. He could call me his wife, but I would never truly belong to him. And yet, even as I whispered the vow into the night, I felt a dangerous truth stirring beneath the surface. Because for all the hatred I felt, for all the fury that burned inside me, the memory of his hand steadying me on the plane still haunted me, and I hated myself for remembering it. The next morning, the mansion woke before I did. Somewhere beyond the velvet curtains, footsteps echoed down marble halls and low voices murmured in Italian. The scent of strong coffee and polished wood drifted into the room, pulling me from a restless, dreamless sleep. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then reality crashed down. The forged marriage, the plane, the trap I had walked into without even realizing it. I was a prisoner in silk sheets. A knock came before I could move. A servant entered, head bowed, and set a tray on the table beside the bed. Espresso, pastries, fruit I'd never tasted before. It was a breakfast meant for royalty, and yet it felt more like an offering to a captive. "Mr. Dantis requests your presence," the woman said quietly before leaving. Requests. The word almost made me laugh. There were no requests here, only commands dressed in polite language. I changed into the clothes left for me, a soft cream dress that fit too perfectly, as if he had known my measurements long before we met, and followed the servant through endless hallways until we reached a set of heavy double doors. They swung open to reveal a grand chamber filled with men in suits. The air inside was heavy with power and danger. Vicenzo stood at the head of a long mahogany table, his presence dominating the room even though he said nothing. When he saw me, he gestured for me to join him. Every head in the room turned as I stepped forward. Their gazes slid over me, curious, appraising, some cold, others calculating. It felt like standing under a microscope. "This is my wife," Vicenzo announced, his voice carrying through the chamber like a commandment. Alice Dantis. The name hit me like a slap. My name, twisted, rewritten. A murmur rippled through the room. Some eyes widened, others narrowed. They had heard rumors, perhaps, but this was the first time they saw me for themselves. The air shifted. I wasn't just a stranger. I was now a piece on their chessboard. One of the older men, gray hair, sharp eyes, leaned back in his chair and blew a puff of cigar smoke into the air. "Married in Las Vegas," he said. "Quick work, Vicenzo." His tone carried a challenge beneath the casual words. "The best decisions," Vicenzo replied coolly, "are made before anyone has the chance to interfere." My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to scream the truth, to tell them this was all a lie, but Vicenzo's hand brushed the small of my back, a silent warning. Not now, not here. Another man, younger and more reckless, raised his glass with a mocking grin. "A beautiful bride," he said, "though fragile. You'll have to guard her well." Vicenzo's gaze snapped to him, the room's temperature dropping several degrees. "She is guarded," he said flatly, "and anyone foolish enough to test that will regret it." The grin vanished. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. The meeting continued. Talk of territories and alliances, of shipments and debts, but I heard none of it. My mind spun with fear and fury. I was a display, a symbol of power, a living message to these men that Vicenzo Dantis was untouchable. When it ended, he guided me out of the chamber with a hand that felt too much like a leash. As soon as the heavy doors closed behind us, I spun to face him. "You paraded me like property," I hissed. "Not property," he said calmly. "Proof." "Proof of what? That you own me?" "Proof that no one will touch you without facing me first." I stared at him, anger and confusion twisting together in my chest. There was no remorse in his eyes, no apology, only cold certainty. And yet, beneath that, something else flickered, a kind of fear I couldn't name. That night, the mansion hosted a dinner. The same men from the council filled the grand dining hall, joined by others, allies, rivals, people whose names carried weight in a world I had never known. I sat beside Vicenzo, trying to shrink into invisibility. It didn't work. Eyes followed me everywhere. And then he arrived. Matteo Moretti. I recognized the name from whispers at the meeting. A rival, dangerous, ambitious. He moved through the room like he owned it, his charm as sharp as a blade. When he reached our table, he bowed slightly to Vicenzo, then turned his attention to me. "And this must be the new bride," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Alice, is it?" I nodded stiffly, my throat suddenly dry. "A beautiful name," he murmured, taking my hand and brushing his lips across my skin before I could pull away. The gesture was old-fashioned. It calculated. His eyes never left mine, and they glimmered with amusement, and something darker. Beside me, Vicenzo went completely still. Only the whiteness of his knuckles around his glass betrayed the storm beneath his composure. "If you ever need a friend," Matteo continued softly, "someone to help you navigate this world, my door is always open." Before I could reply, Vicenzo's hand clamped onto my knee beneath the table, firm and possessive. "My wife requires nothing from anyone outside this family," he said, voice smooth but laced with steel. "She is well cared for." Matteo's smile widened. "Of course. Still, the offer stands." The rest of the dinner passed in brittle silence. I barely tasted the food. Matteo's gaze lingered. Vicenzo's fury simmered, and I sat trapped between two storms. And deep inside, one terrifying thought refused to leave me. This was no ordinary rivalry. I had become the spark in a war between men who would burn the world to possess me, and there was no turning back now. The rain came without warning that night, sweeping across the estate in cold, relentless sheets, soaking the gardens and rattling the iron gates. It felt fitting. The sky itself was angry, raging against the gilded prison that held me. I stood by the balcony doors of my room, staring out at the storm, every muscle in my body wound tight with frustration. Days had passed since the dinner, since Matteo's lingering gaze and Vicenzo's furious grip beneath the table. The tension between them was growing sharper by the hour, and I knew, deep down, that I was at the center of it. But I refused to stay a pawn in their game. Not anymore. The plan was reckless, desperate, possibly suicidal, but it was the only chance I had. I had spent the past 2 nights watching the guards, memorizing their rotations, noting the blind spots in the estate's security. It wasn't much, but it was enough. If I timed it right, I could make it past the walls before dawn. I didn't care where I ended up. Anywhere was better than this. I dressed in dark clothes and slipped a small knife into my pocket, not for violence, but for courage. My hands trembled as I crept through the darkened halls, every step a battle against fear. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of voices and the steady drum of rain against the glass. When I reached the side corridor that led to the service exit, my heart hammered so loudly I was certain someone would hear it. The latch was cold beneath my fingers as I slid it open. For one glorious second, freedom was right there. Just a few steps and I'd be outside. And then a voice cut through the darkness. "Leaving so soon?" I froze. Matteo stepped from the shadows, leaning against the wall with the kind of smile that sent a chill down my spine. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loose, but there was nothing casual about the sharpness in his eyes. "Going somewhere, Bella?" he asked. "Out," I whispered. "Just out." "Out from Vicenzo's palace?" His tone was mocking. "A dangerous move." "You know he trapped me," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "You saw it. You know none of this is real." "Oh, I know," he replied, stepping closer, the scent of his cologne mingling with the rain. "And I also know how to undo it." My breath caught. "Undo it?" "Papers can be burned. Witnesses can disappear. I can give you your freedom, Alice," he said, his voice dropping to a purr. "All you have to do is come with me." For a heartbeat, hope flared in my chest. But then I looked into his eyes and saw the hunger there, not for me, but for what I represented. I wasn't a person to him. I was a weapon, a prize he wanted only because Vicenzo valued me. "You don't care about me," I whispered. "You just want to hurt him." "Does it matter?" he asked. "You want freedom. I want revenge. Our goals align." I took a step back, shaking my head. "I'll find my own way." Matteo's hand had shot out, gripping my wrist hard enough to make me wince. "Don't be foolish," he hissed. "He will destroy you. I'll at least let you live while I take everything else." I yanked free, heart pounding. "I'd rather take my chances with him than be your pawn." For a moment, the mask slipped. His eyes hardened, his jaw tightening. Then he laughed softly. "Brave girl. I wonder how long that bravery lasts." He vanished into the shadows as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving me shaken and breathless. My knees threatened to buckle, but I forced myself upright. That was no rescue. That was another cage waiting to close around me. I closed the latch and stumbled back to my room, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest aching. I hated myself for it, but the truth was undeniable. As much as I despised Vicenzo's control, as much as I craved freedom, Matteo's touch had terrified me in a way Vicenzo's never had. I slid down the wall, tears burning my eyes. Maybe I was doomed either way. Maybe there was no escape. But one thing had become painfully clear. If I had to fight for my life, I'd rather fight the devil I knew. Unbeknownst to me, my failed escape hadn't gone unnoticed. In another part of the house, Vicenzo received a whispered report from a guard who had seen movement near the side entrance. His blood ran cold as realization struck. The thought of me slipping away into a world that wanted me dead made something primal rise inside him, a fear deeper than rage, deeper than control. And with that fear came a storm that would change everything. The night after my failed escape was heavier than any I had known. Sleep refused to come. My thoughts were a tangled storm of anger, confusion, and shame. I hated myself for even considering Matteo's offer, hated that I had let fear guide me back into this cage. But more than anything, I hated how parent of me had felt safe when Vicenzo's name was the alternative. Safe, in the arms of the man who had stolen my choices. What was happening to me? I was still wrestling with the thought when the lights in my room suddenly cut out. The mansion plunged into darkness. A second later, the sound of distant shouting echoed through the halls. Boots pounded against marble. A sharp crack split the air. Not thunder, gunfire. My blood turned to ice. Before I could move, the door to my room burst open. It wasn't Vicenzo. It wasn't a guard I recognized. 2 masked men stormed in, their movements sharp and purposeful. One grabbed my wrist, yanking me from the bed, while the other pressed a cold piece of metal against my side. "Don't scream," one hissed, "and you might live." They dragged me into the corridor, past the bodies of unconscious guards, through a maze of servants' passages I had never seen before. My bare feet stumbled against the cold stone floors as my heart slammed in my chest. This wasn't another game. This was real. Whoever they weren't here to threaten. They were here to take me. We made it as far as the side courtyard before the world exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from every direction, shattering the night with brutal precision. Bullets tore into stone pillars, shouts echoed from the rooftops. The men holding me cursed in Italian and ducked for cover, dragging me behind them. And then he was there. Vicenzo. Emerging from the darkness like something carved from vengeance itself, flanked by armed men who moved as one with terrifying discipline. His eyes locked onto me instantly, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something that wasn't control or calculation. I saw fear. "Let her go!" he barked, his voice low, but carrying over the storm of gunfire. "Stay back!" one of the men shouted, pressing the gun harder against my ribs. "We'll kill her!" Vicenzo took a step forward, then another, calm, controlled. But his hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "If you pull that trigger," he said softly, "you will not live to regret it." Something in his voice made even the kidnappers hesitate. The one holding me shifted uneasily, and in that brief, fatal moment of hesitation, everything changed. A shot rang out. The man beside me dropped, blood blooming across his chest. The second tried to run, but Vicenzo was faster. He slammed the man against the wall with a force that made the stone crack, the gun clattering uselessly to the ground. Then he was beside me. His hands shook as they cupped my face, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, my voice lost. "Did they touch you?" "No," I whispered. "I'm fine." The relief that crossed his face was raw and unguarded, gone a second later as he barked orders to his men to secure the property. But even as he turned away, his hand didn't leave mine. It was as if letting go would mean losing me again. Back inside, the mansion was a war zone. Bodies were carried out. Blood stained the marble floors. I was shaken but alive. And Vicenzo, he was different, quieter, angrier, and somehow gentler with me. He stayed close that night, pacing the room while I sat silently on the edge of the bed. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "This is what I meant when I said the world would devour you. They weren't after money. They weren't after me. They were after you." "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do they want with me?" "Because of who you are," he said, and his eyes darkened with something that looked like regret. "Because of the blood that runs in your veins. Because of a legacy you don't even know exists." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, and in that pause, I knew that everything I believed about myself was about to change. "You were never just a waitress. Alice," he said finally, "you are the daughter of Salvatore Bandi, the last heir of one of the most powerful Mafia families in Europe, and that makes you the most dangerous woman alive." The room spun. The name meant nothing to me, yet something deep inside stirred. A fragment of a memory, a lullaby in another language, a voice calling my name from far away. And then the truth hit me with suffocating clarity. I wasn't stolen. I wasn't chosen by chance. I was claimed, and every moment of my life until now had been part of a plan I never knew existed. I looked at Vicenzo, the man who had taken everything from me, and realized something terrifying. The man I hated might be the only one who could keep me alive. The world tilted beneath me as his words echoed in my skull. Daughter of Salvatore Bandi, heir to a Mafia empire I didn't even know existed. It felt like he had ripped open the floor beneath my feet and shown me a life buried in shadows. Everything I thought I knew about myself, the poverty, the anonymity, the ordinary struggles, all of it was a lie built on a hidden truth. My name was more dangerous than any weapon. And now, everyone wanted a piece of me. I stumbled back from Vicenzo, the walls closing in. "You're lying," I whispered, but the tremor in my voice betrayed the fear clawing at my chest. "I wish I were," he said quietly. "But it's the truth. Your father was murdered before you could walk. Your mother disappeared soon after, hiding you under a false identity. They believed it was the only way to keep you alive." "Then how do you know all this?" I demanded. "How do you know who I am if I didn't?" "Because I was there," he said, stepping closer, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I grew up alongside your family. Salvatore was my father's closest ally, and when the war broke out, he made me swear that if anything happened to him, I would find you, protect you, keep you safe, even if it meant becoming the villain in your eyes." The room spun, my knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the table to stay upright. All this time, I had seen him as the man who stole my freedom, the man who manipulated me into a marriage I never wanted, but if what he was saying was true, then every ruthless decision, every cold act, had been part of a vow he made long before I even knew his name. "You call this protection?" I hissed, tears burning behind my eyes. "Lying to me, trapping me, ruining my life?" His jaw tightened. "If I had told you who you were, they would have killed you before you could board that plane. If I had left you alone, Matteo or someone worse would have gotten to you first, and then your bloodline would end with a bullet." I turned away, gripping the balcony rail as the wind whipped around me. The truth was a storm, tearing through everything I believed about myself. I had spent my life running from nothing, and now I was trapped by a legacy I never asked for. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. One of Vicenzo's men entered, his face pale. "We have a problem," he said. "Matteo has called a meeting. He wants negotiations, but he's bringing the Morandi family with him." The name made Vicenzo's expression darken. "The Morandis," he muttered. "Of course." He turned to me. "They're one of the oldest families still loyal to Salvatore's enemies. If they're aligning with Matteo, it means they know who you are now." My chest tightened. "Then I need to leave. I need to disappear." He shook his head. "There's nowhere safe anymore. The second you walk out of this house, they'll find you. The only way to survive now is to face them." The idea of facing the people who wanted me dead made my stomach twist, but there was no time to argue. Within hours, preparations were underway for a meeting that could decide whether I lived or died. I was dressed in black silk, my hair pulled back, my trembling hands hidden in gloves. Vicenzo stood beside me, a wall of cold strength, but even he couldn't, tied the tension tightening his jaw. The meeting took place in a candle-lit chamber deep beneath the estate. Matteo was already there, leaning casually against a pillar, a wolf in an expensive suit. Beside him stood a woman with ice in her eyes, Isabella Morandi. Her gaze slid over me with slow calculation, and a small smile curved her lips. "So it's true," she said softly. The lost Bandi girl lives. Alive and untouchable, Vicenzo replied. Isabella's smile sharpened. Untouchable? Everyone is touchable when the stakes are high enough. The words slithered through the room like poison. The tension was suffocating. Matteo stepped forward, his gaze locking onto mine. I can make this easy, Alice, he said smoothly. Walk away from Vicenzo. Marry me instead. Unite the Bandi and Moretti bloodlines, and no one will dare harm you. The proposal hit me like a slap. Marry you? I spat. You tried to kidnap me. He smiled. A misunderstanding. My methods were aggressive, but my offer is real. With me, you'll rule. With him, you'll spend your life running. Vicenzo's voice was cold enough to freeze the air. Touch her, and I will end you where you stand. Matteo's grin didn't falter. Then we're at war. The meeting ended without resolution. Lines were drawn, alliances sealed. By the time we returned to the mansion, I understood the reality of my situation. My life was no longer mine. I wasn't just Alice anymore. I was the heir to a blood feud older than I was, and I was the prize both men would burn the world to possess. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection that no longer felt like me. Somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and anger, a fire flickered to life. I was done running, done hiding. If my name was a weapon, then I would learn to wield it. And when the war came, because it would, I would make sure I was no one's pawn ever again. The night before the meetin', G felt like the longest of my life. Every tick of the clock sounded like a countdown to something inevitable, something I couldn't outrun. The air in the mansion was charged with tension. Armed guards patrolled every hallway, whispers of alliances and betrayals slipped through closed doors, and in the deepest parts of my chest, fear tangled with something fiercer, determination. I wasn't just a girl caught in a Mafia war anymore. I was the reason it had begun, and maybe, just maybe, I could be the reason it ended. Vicenzo hadn't slept. I knew because I found him in the library at dawn, still in the same suit from the night before, a half-empty glass of whiskey untouched beside him. His eyes were red-rimmed, but the fire in them hadn't dimmed. When he looked up and saw me, something softened in his expression, just for a moment. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. Neither should you, I replied. But here we are. He didn't argue. Instead, he rose from his chair and crossed the room until he stood close enough that I could feel the tension radiating from his body. Tomorrow could decide everything, he murmured. It's not just about us anymore. If Matteo and the Morandis join forces, it won't be a war. It will be a slaughter. And they won't stop until they've taken everything from me. From you. I swallowed hard. Then we don't let them win. His brow furrowed. This isn't a fairy tale, Alice. Words won't stop bullets. No, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. But I can. The words surprised even me, but they were true. I was the last Bandi, and that meant I wasn't powerless. My name was more valuable than territory, more dangerous than guns. And if they wanted to use me as a pawn, then I would turn myself into a queen. The meeting was set for midnight. Neutral ground, an abandoned opera house on the edge of the city, chosen for its history and its symbolism. Once a place where kings and killers watched the same stage, now it would host a performance of a different kind. I wore black again, not because Vicenzo insisted, but because it felt right, a signal that the girl who once scrubbed diner floors was gone. When we arrived, the opera house was already surrounded. Matteo's men, Morandi soldiers, dozens of eyes tracking our every move as we stepped into the cavernous hall. Matteo was waiting on the stage, his smile a blade wrapped in silk. Isabella Morandi stood beside him, poised and deadly. The air was thick with unspoken violence. You're late, Matteo said, his voice echoing off the crumbling walls. Had to make sure we weren't walking into an ambush, Vicenzo replied, his tone a calm that was more dangerous than rage. Would I ever do that? Matteo's smile widened. We're all family here, after all. My voice cut through the tension before Vicenzo could respond. "Then let's speak as family." Every head turned toward me. The hall fell silent. Even Matteo's smirk faltered for a heartbeat. I walked past Vicenzo, past the line of guards, and stepped into the center of the stage. "I know why you're here," I said, my voice steady, stronger than I felt. "You think if you control me, you control everything. The Bandi legacy, the alliances, the throne you've been killing each other to sit on. But you're wrong." Matteo's eyes narrowed. "And why is that?" "Because I'm not a prize," I said. "And I'm not a pawn. I'm a Bandi. And from this moment forward, I decide how this ends." A murmur rippled through the hall. Isabella stepped forward, her voice cold. "You think anyone will listen to a girl with no army, no soldiers?" I smiled, a sharp, deliberate thing. "I don't need an army. I am the army. Every loyalist still breathing, every old ally waiting for a reason to rise. They answer to my blood, not yours." The silence that followed was electric. Matteo's mask slipped, fury flashing in his eyes. "You don't know what you're playing with Alice." "No," I said softly, "but you do, and that's why you're afraid." For a heartbeat, the tension balanced on a knife's edge. Then chaos exploded. A gunshot shattered the silence, followed by another. Isabella screamed for her men to attack. Vicenzo pulled me back as bullets tore through the opera house. It was no longer a negotiation. It was an execution. Vicenzo's men stormed in through the side entrances, guns blazing. Bodies fell. Smoke filled the air. Matteo disappeared into the chaos, but not before locking eyes with me one last time, his expression twisted with rage, and something worse. Obsession. By the time the shooting stopped, the opera house was a ruin. Blood stained the marble, and silence settled heavy as ash. Vicenzo grabbed my shoulders, his chest heaving. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, though my pulse still raced like wildfire. "It's not over," I whispered. "No," he said, his jaw tight. "It's just begun." And deep down, I knew he was right. This wasn't just a war for power anymore. It was a war for me, for my blood, my name, my soul. And the most terrifying part was that the next move might not come from Matteo or Isabella. It might come from me. The Opera House massacre changed everything. The fragile lines that once separated enemies from allies vanished under the spray of gunfire. Naples was no longer a city simmering with tension. It was a battlefield, and I was the spark that had set it ablaze. By dawn, bodies littered the streets, safe houses burned to the ground, and whispers of the Bandi girl echoed in every corner of the underworld. I stared out the balcony of the Dantis estate, my reflection fractured in the window. I had come to Las Vegas chasing a cleaning job, a chance at survival. Now I was standing at the heart of a Mafia war older than I was, my bloodline both curse and crown. And the worst part was, I no longed, or knew if I wanted to run from it, or rule it. Vicenzo entered quietly, but his presence filled the room. His shirt was stained with blood, not his own, and his eyes were darker than I had ever seen them. "It's begun," he said, his voice low. "The Morettis have aligned with the Morandis. The Carusos are circling. They'll come for us before the week is over." "Then let them," I said, turning to face him. "I'm done hiding." He studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. "You've changed." "I've woken up." For the next 2 days, plans were drawn and alliances forged. Vicenzo called in debts that had been owed for decades. I sat beside him during every meeting, no longer the silent pawn, but a name that carried weight. Men twice my age lowered their heads when I spoke. Rivals listened. Even enemies hesitated. It terrified me and thrilled me. But Matteo wasn't done. On the third night, a message arrived. A single envelope left at our gates with no signature. Inside, a photograph, a warehouse near the docks, and scrawled beneath it, 6 words that turned my blood to ice. "Come alone, or she dies tonight." Vicenzo's hand tightened around the photo. It's a trap. I know. You're not going, he growled. He wants you out there so he can end this on his terms. I have to, I whispered, because this isn't about power anymore. It's about us. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he pulled me into his arms, holding me as if the world were about to end. If anything happens to you, it won't, I said, though my heart hammered with doubt. Because you'll find me. The warehouse was a skeleton of rust and shadow. I stepped inside, every instinct screaming that I was walking into hell. Matteo was waiting, of course. He stood in the center of the room, calm, almost triumphant. I knew you'd come, he said, his smile a serpent's hiss. Where is she? I demanded. He gestured to the corner, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't a hostage, it was a coffin, empty, symbolic, a promise of what awaited me. You think this is about bloodlines and power, Matteo said, circling me like a predator. But it's simpler than that. I want him broken, and the only way to do that is to destroy you. Before I could react, the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the room, then gunfire, shouts, chaos erupted. I ducked behind a pillar as bullets tore through metal and concrete. It wasn't just Matteo's men. Vicenzo had come, and he'd brought war with him. I caught a glimpse of him through the smoke, fighting like a man with nothing left to lose. Blood streaked his cheek, his movements fueled by fury and desperation. Our eyes met for a split second, and in that look was everything he'd never said. I will burn the world for you. The fight ended as suddenly as it began. Matteo was on his knees, blood dripping from a wound in his side, defiance still burning in his eyes. Vicenzo stood over him, gun in hand, chest heaving. Do it, Matteo spat. Kill me. Prove you're just like me. Vicenzo raised the gun, then lowered it. No. Death is too easy for you. You'll live, and you'll watch as everything you built turns to ash. Matteo laughed, coughing blood. You think this is over? It's never over. Not for people like us. Maybe he was right. Maybe the war would never truly end. But in that moment, as Vicenzo reached for me and pulled me into his arms, I didn't care. Because for the first time, the war hadn't won. We had. Weeks passed. The streets of Naples slowly quieted. Old families bent the knee or were erased entirely. And through it all, Vicenzo and I rebuilt. Not just his empire, but our lives. One evening, I stood in the gardens, the air heavy with roses and salt from the distant sea. Vicenzo approached silently, his hand slipping into mine. There was no violence in his too. Ouch! Now, no demand, only something softer. I never believed I deserved peace, he murmured. Not until you... I pressed a hand to my stomach, my heart pounding as I whispered the words that would change everything again. You're going to be a father. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then he sank to his knees, his forehead resting against me as if the weight of the world had finally lifted. I swear, he whispered, voice breaking. I will protect you both with everything I am. The war was far from forgotten. Enemies would rise again. But for the first time in my life, the future didn't terrify me. It felt like a promise. I had boarded a plane as a tired, invisible girl. I had woken up a prisoner, a pawn, a bride. And now I stood as a queen beside the man who had once stolen my freedom and ended up giving me everything. And as the sun set over Naples, gilding the world in gold, I knew one unshakable truth. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning.